So about a year ago, I hit up my friend Sean to see if he wanted to help me out with a little experiment. Basically, Fender had recently come out with their Cuneife pickups, which were like a higher end pickup alternative that I had really only seen come stock in like some pretty high end custom shop tellies. Now I knew this would be a pretty cool process and that in the long run, it was probably going to be something that bonded me more to this guitar simply because I knew how unique the specs were to me. But what I didn't know at the time was that less than a month later, I would actually be getting my first ever custom shop, the G&L S500. Now getting this guitar was really cool simply because of the fact that I had owned a different G&L for about 5 years, a Legacy, and I was really interested in seeing the differences between the two mainline models. But I think at the time I was way more interested in basking in the Fender alternative that I geek out so much about than I was in actually finding out what makes custom shops so sought after and what makes people go so incredibly crazy for them. But after having had this bad boy for almost a year, I think I have a much better understanding of what it actually is, and more importantly, what makes custom shops so sought after in general. So real quick, I want to show you. Okay, so obviously the first thing we need to talk about is the sound. Pretty much anyone who's considering the potential of getting a custom shop, it's pretty much presumed that you're at the highest end of the quality spectrum tonally. I mean, when I first got this thing, it was just assumed in my mind that it would sound straight up top of the line out of the box. And let me show you what I mean real quick. So I've been going quad cortex in like 99% of cases more recently, simply because I have a lot of gigs coming up and it's easier. But with this bad boy, I feel like you gotta go real mic and real amp, so I pulled out the Royer. And I know that essentially I'm just gonna have to let my neighbors hate me for a minute. Also, the Supro happens to not be super noisy, but more on that in a second. Okay, so when I first started playing this, the sound quality was pretty much exactly what I expected, which was phenomenal. I mean, listen to this. But I wasn't really surprised, or I wasn't really dumbfounded in any way, because my expectations going in were so high to begin with. Now, keeping in mind that the guitar sounds fantastic, it's by a very large margin the most expensive instrument I've ever owned. You'd think it would be my number one choice to use for every gig, every single jam. It would be featured in every video, and it would just be sitting there on the wall for completely easy access at any time of the day. However, that ended up not being the case at all for a few different reasons, mainly involving, well, this neck pickup right here. You see, my particular taste has always been that I like having the humbucker and the bridge of a Strat as opposed to the traditional single coil, simply because I've never really vibed with the Strat single coil bridge pickup sound. However, the traditional sound of a single coil neck pickup on a Strat, that might be my favorite guitar sound ever. So when I first picked up this guitar, I was emphatically excited about the potential idea of seeing how good this would sound on like a custom shop G&L for the first time. But the second I plugged it in, actually something really interesting happened. I noticed that it was actually quite noisy. Now, this became sort of a twofold problem because a lot of that noise comes with knowing and fully accepting that a lot of that actually has to do with the fact of, well, the room, and knowing that if I was in an ideal scenario, in an ideal studio that was completely treated to deal with that, I wouldn't have to deal with that hum, but that's not necessarily the world that I live in. Now, on the other end of the argument, I actually know of a lot of guitar players who embrace the hum sound. They view it as like a part of the character of the tone that you're trying to get. And even in a modern world where we have all of these different innovations, especially when it comes to guitars and different pickup options, with something like noiseless pickups, there are a lot of different people that think that they produce a pretty lifeless sound and actually wouldn't mind and would want to embrace some of the hum that comes out of a more traditional pickup style. Now, the idea of embracing the hum and embracing some of that noise from the amp and from the guitar is a very new idea to me. I've always fought that wholeheartedly, but in wanting to be realistic and thinking back to what a lot of the really early guitar legends were dealing with, guys in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the Claptons, the Chuck Berrys, the Jimi Hendrixes, they didn't have all the different luxuries that we have today in terms of the technology of what you could put in a guitar, especially back in those days if they were playing with a Strat or, God forbid, a P90, which was what a lot of the guys that were playing with, you had to sort of deal with and embrace the noise. And I can totally understand if someone's going to make a big purchase like a custom shop wanting to fully embrace what some of their heroes might have experienced if that's who influenced them, and getting as close to that as possible. So I guess the question just becomes then for yourself personally, how much noise can you actually handle? Okay, so the next thing that's really important is actually the finish. Now, this is something that I wasn't really hip to until more recently when I got my American Vintage 2 Strat, when I discovered that a lot of the reason why people were excited for those is that they actually came with a nitro finish, which is important because that's something that you don't really see on a lot of modern day guitars outside of, say, I don't know, custom shops. And learning that information made it super important for me to actually take a look back at this guy to see what we were dealing with. Now, with this guitar, you do have a nitro finish, which are generally known to relic better, but in general as a whole, not just with custom shops, because more guitars in the modern day are trying to do this artificially, it really just comes down to whether or not you like relicking at all. This guitar happens to have a heavier relic job than pretty much any guitar I've ever owned outside of my Telly, which now that I'm looking at it, simply because of the cracks on the GNL, this does seem like a more vintage antique style look. But when you really look at the big picture, neither of those guitars are even close to as relic as some of the heavy relics that you see out of different custom shops. Now, for being completely honest, we all know that relicking and finishes, those aren't things that ever really drastically affect your playing ability or your technique. Now, you could get into the conversation of tone woods as accords to getting sounds, but I think when it comes to finishes and relicking, it really all matters because, let's be honest, custom shop guitars are expensive. They are the most expensive guitars for a reason. And if GNL, Fender, whatever company is charging so much for the custom shop, you want to make sure that they get it right. Price matters a lot with guitars, and we're lying to ourselves when we say it doesn't. Now, the thing that I've noticed in 99% of cases when it comes to custom shops specifically is that the people buying these guitars are usually people who are using it on a strictly professional basis, like the guys who make their income playing guitar in studios or on the road, like the real professional cats, or someone who is looking for a lifetime dream guitar, like the type of acts that you'll play regularly on a consistent basis, maybe for the next 25 years. And with a guitar that you're going to be using for that long a period of time that means that much to you, you really are invested in that consistency of build quality, especially getting it customized exactly the way you want it. Now, there's one last thing that I really wanted to address on this that happens to matter more than ever when you get into the world of custom shops, and that happens to be the branding. And you know what I'm talking about. The name on the headstock. Now, just like with the finish, because custom shop guitars tend to be more expensive, this matters more than ever because you want to bang for your buck. You want to get right what you're paying for. So this isn't something like with a lot of other guitars where we can just flag off and be like, it sounds good, so why does the rest matter? Now, my first thought with this idea, if someone's spending so much, if someone's getting their dream guitar, why wouldn't they just go to the big brands, the Fenders, the Gibsons? They obviously have a higher resale value. However, like the point we were saying before, that when someone's getting a custom shop, a lot of people, they aren't looking for that guitar that they're going to sell 2 years down the line. They're looking for the ideal build of something they're going to keep for the long term. And if resale is less of a factor because you plan on keeping this possibly for the rest of your life, I think that's where the GNL fanboys and for the Les Pauls, the Heritage fanboys really start to come to play and where a lot of their marketing can take shape. So at the end of the day, why does any of this matter? Why should I care? And I think for a couple specific reasons that I keep thinking about. First of which is when I first discovered the guitar and when I first started getting into the world of gear, I thought that someone would want a custom shop simply because of the name. You're saying that you play a custom shop guitar, it gives you some sort of relevance, or it gives the guitar some sort of assumed quality, which I wouldn't necessarily disagree with even all those years later with all that I've learned. There is an inherent quality, depending on the factory that it's coming out of, that you're assuming you're going to get when you're coming out of a custom shop, and none of those assumptions are really a bad thing. And the other thing, I wasn't really thinking about the potential customization that you get here. I was thinking about one overall quality of sound that every guitar player was hypothetically trying to achieve that you couldn't get unless you were looking towards a custom shop guitar, because that was the highest threshold of sound, where I didn't necessarily realize that once you start getting into the higher end of guitars, the plane of how much better the sound quality increases per $1,000 that you spend kind of goes down, and it's less about wanting a particular quality of sound and more about wanting a specific sound. And once you know what exactly that is and what specifically you want, I think that's where the magic of custom shops really come in. And I think the general art of knowing what you want and getting the knowledge of what makes all these little things different, that can sometimes take years and years. And that's what I'm trying to learn right now in studying gear. But once you know those things, the Strat can become way more than a Strat, and a guitar can become way more than just a guitar because it specifically fit every single detail to exactly what you wanted. Like more than just I wanted an SSH configuration, or even specifically I wanted the pickups to sound like this. but I needed these specific pickups for this specific sound. But at the end of the day, I really love this guitar. I've loved having it in the times that I've gotten to play it, and I do look forward to some future gigs and some future shows with some less noisy rooms where I'll be able to show more of what this thing can do, or also just being able to embrace the hum, which is something I want to be able to do more and more with different guitars. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. What do you think of custom shop guitars as a whole? Have you ever owned one? What's your dream guitar? Please let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I've been meaning to make another video on this guitar and really go into depth about custom shops in general for a while, but I just hadn't gotten around to it. But if you want to know anything more about the GNL S500 Custom Shop, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The link is in the description. Make sure to check it out. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear like the mics, the amps, pedals that I used in this video. Make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to my patrons. There's some cool stuff upcoming on there if you want to join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic day.